Jack Reynolds sat alone in his dimly lit office on the 32nd floor of a Chicago high-rise, the leather chair creaking under his broad frame as rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city skyline glowed through the storm, a constellation of steel and glass, cold and detached, a world apart from the sunburnt plains of Lubbock, Texas, where he'd spent his teenage summers flipping burgers at his dad's roadside shack. That shack had grown into Family Flavor Diner, a chain of 35 diners stretching across the Midwest like a ribbon of nostalgia, built on the backbone of Smoky Stack burgers piled high with smoked brisket, pecan pie that tasted like a warm hug from a grandmother, and a promise of home for every weary traveler who shuffled through the door. It was the kind of place where truckers swapped tales over endless cups of black coffee, where kids left sticky ketchup handprints on cracked red vinyl booths, where old-timers lingered over pie and reminisced about the good old days when gas was $1 a gallon. For decades, it had been a lifeline for small-town America, a beacon of comfort in a fast-moving world. Now, it was crumbling, and Jack felt the weight of it pressing down on his chest like a slab of concrete. The past 12 months had been a relentless gut punch. Sales had plummeted 40%, a nosedive that left the company's ledgers bleeding red ink. Regulars, folks who'd been coming since Jack was a kid, stopped showing up, their booths empty, their laughter gone. Online reviews cut deeper than a rusty switchblade. Greasy dump with no soul. Burgers a tire fire masquerading as food. Pecan pie's a sin against Texas. Hank Reynolds is rolling in his grave. Staff turnover was a nightmare. Cooks walked out mid-shift. Waitresses ghosted after a single paycheck, leaving Jack's managers scrambling to fill gaps with teenagers who didn't know a spatula from a soup ladle. His boardroom suits, a pack of slick-haired MBAs and tailor blazers, fed him excuses like day-old fries, soaring beef prices, Gen Z chasing avocado toast, and oat milk lattes, inflation chewing through profit margins. At 52, with gray creeping into his stubble and a gut that mocked his high school football glory days as Lubbock High's star linebacker, Jack felt failure clawing at him like a vulture on roadkill. His dad, Hank Reynolds, had built this empire with nothing but a beat-up grill, a stubborn grin, and a handshake deal with a local cattle rancher, a man who'd rather sweat over a hot stove than grovel to a bank. Jack couldn't let it die. Not now. Not ever. But it wasn't just his dad's legacy driving him tonight. It was Jake Jr., his son, 25, tattooed up his arms with ink that told stories Jack didn't understand, and stubborn as a longhorn steer in a thunderstorm. 2 years ago, they'd had it out right here in this office, a shouting match that still echoed in Jack's skull. "You don't give a damn about family, Dad." Jake had roared, his voice cracking with fury. "It's all money to you. Profits, expansion, your precious bottom line. You forgot what Grandpa built this for." He'd slammed the door so hard the frame rattled, leaving Jack alone with a half-empty bottle of bourbon and a silence that stung worse than the liquor. Jake had grown up in the Lubbock diner, flipping patties beside Jack as a kid, dreaming of taking over one day with his own twist on the Smoky Stack, maybe a chipotle kick or a bacon jam glaze. But Jack's obsession with growth, new locations, franchise deals, a shiny headquarters, had driven a wedge between them. Hank's death from a heart attack 10 years back had shattered them both, and while Jack buried his grief in spreadsheets and conference calls, Jake drifted away, first to Austin, then off the grid entirely. Jack hadn't seen him since, hadn't heard his voice, hadn't even gotten a text. The diner was all he had left to bridge that gap. If he could save it, maybe he could save his son. The note was the spark that lit the fuse. He'd found it slipped under his office door after a sleepless night of pacing, scribbled in jagged black ink on a scrap of yellow legal paper. If you want to save your legacy, get off your high horse and see the truth from the ground. No signature, no hint of who'd left it. Jack crumpled it in his fist, growling, some punk with a grudge, and aimed for the trash can. It missed, landing beside his desk lamp, taunting him with its stark words. Sleep didn't come that night. He paced harder, boots scuffing the hardwood floor, and tore into the financials like a man possessed. Pages of spreadsheets revealed a mess. Unexplained expenses piling up like tumbleweeds, inventory gaps that didn't add up, cash flow bleeding out faster than a stuck pig. He called his regional managers. They dodged with vague promises to check the numbers. His CFO, a weasel named Greg with a permanent smirk, spouted corporate jargon, supply chain disruptions, market volatility, until Jack hung up mid-sentence, slamming the phone down so hard it cracked the receiver. Something stank worse than a grease trap in a Texas summer, and it wasn't coming from the top floor. It hit him like a thunderclap. This wasn't just about Hank's dream anymore. It was about Jake. If he lost the diner, he'd lose his last shot at pulling his son back from the abyss. Jack stood at the window, rain drumming a relentless beat, and made a decision. No more suits, no more boardroom bullshit. He'd go back to Lubbock, to the original family flavor diner where it all began, and dig out the truth himself. But not as Jack Reynolds, CEO with a corner office and a Rolex he hadn't worn in years. He'd be Hank Jones, washed-up dishwasher with a limp, a faded trucker hat pulled low, and a sob story about hard times down in Abilene. If the truth was buried in the grease and grit of that diner, he'd scrub it out with his own two hands, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to bring Jake home. Jack rolled into Lubbock as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky a bruised purple. The diner's neon sign buzzed and flickered like a wounded firefly against the vast Texas dusk, casting a weak glow over a parking lot that was damn near a ghost town. 3 beat-up pickups and a rusted Chevy Impala with a cracked windshield, a pitiful shadow of the bumper-to-bumper nights Jack remembered from his youth. He'd shaved his beard down to stubble, slapped on a gray wig that itched like a swarm of fire ants, and traded his press slack for a pair of jeans stiff with fake dirt, the knees worn thin for effect. His boots were scuffed, the limp was a carefully rehearsed prop, but the nerves jittering in his gut were as real as the day he'd first asked Mary Ellen Harper to prom back in '89. He hadn't scrubbed a pot since he was 16, dodging his dad's lectures about earning your keep while dreaming of Friday night lights. Inside, the diner smelled of burnt coffee, stale fries, and a faint whiff of regret that clung to the walls like old grease. The jukebox in the corner rasped out Johnny Cash's Folsom Prison Blues, the needle skipping slightly, and the red vinyl booths sagged under decades of wear, their stuffing peeking out like cotton through a torn quilt. Tammy Wheeler, the manager, barely glanced at the forged resume Jack handed over, a single sheet claiming dishwashing gigs at dive bars across West Texas, from Odessa to San Angelo. "You're late, Hank," she snapped, her voice sharp as a cattle prod. "Sink's over there. Don't break nothing, or you're out on your ass faster than a jackrabbit in a hailstorm." She was a wiry woman in her mid-40s, her ponytail pulled tight as a bowstring, her hazel eyes darting like she was waiting for the roof to cave in or the devil himself to walk through the door. Jack tipped his trucker hat, mumbled, "Yes, sir, ma'am," and shuffled to the dish station, keeping his head low and his shoulders hunched to sell the act. The crew barely registered his existence, too wrapped up in their own gripes or sneaking smokes out by the dumpster. Luis, the fry cook, was a lanky kid in his early 20s, sporting a faded San Antonio Spurs cap and a perpetual scowl, muttering under his breath about damn hipsters who sent back his fries for being too crispy. Jenny, the waitress, was a peroxide blonde with a smoker's rasp and a chip on her shoulder bigger than a Longhorn's rack, rolling her eyes at every table as she slapped down plates of burgers and gravy-soaked fries. Jack dove into the towering pile of greasy plates, his hands slipping on the cheap dish soap, water splashing his apron and soaking through his boots. First hour on the job, he fumbled a stack of dishes. 10 plates slipped from his grip and smashed on the tiled floor, the crash echoing through the diner like a shotgun blast in a canyon. The room froze, forks pausing midair, eyes swiveling to him. Tammy stormed over, hands planted on her hips, her face flushing red as a chili pepper in the August sun. "You trying to bankrupt us, newbie?" she bellowed, her voice cutting through the hum of the jukebox. "That's coming out of your check, and don't think I won't dock you double." Jack bit his tongue so hard he tasted copper. Ironic, since he was the damn checkbook, and muttered, "Sorry, ma'am, won't happen again," bending low to sweep up the shard with a broom he could barely grip right. As he worked, he noticed Tammy's rhythm. She was a drill sergeant with the staff, snapping at Luis for oversalting a batch of fries until the kid's ears turned pink, barking at Jenny for forgetting a Coke refill like it was a capital offense. But at 10 sharp, when 3 guys in slick suits rolled in, her whole demeanor flipped like a light switch. She turned syrup sweet, hovering over their table with a nervous smile, refilling their coffees before they even asked. They ordered Smoky Stacks, barely touched them. Jack saw the plates come back with the burgers half-eaten, the buns still intact, and left a crisp $100 bill on the table, folded neatly under a salt shaker. Tammy pocketed it quick, her hands trembling slightly, and watched them saunter out, their polished loafers clicking on the tile like a metronome. Jack's gut twinged, a warning bell clanging in his skull. Who tips a Benjamin for cold food in a diner off Highway 84? These weren't oilmen or ranchers. They moved like city sharks, and Tammy was scared of them. Later, as he scrubbed a stack of greasy skillets, Tammy lingered near the dish pit, her guard down for a fleeting moment. She muttered half to herself, "Ellie's counts were low today. Damn doctors don't know squat." Jack played dumb, keeping his voice gruff but gentle. "Ellie, that your kid?" Tammy flinched, then softened, her eyes glistening under the fluorescent lights. "Yeah, my girl. 8 years old, leukemia, kicking her little butt. Chemo's rough, keeps her fighting, though." Jack nodded, his throat tightening. "Sounds like a tough kid, tougher than most." Tammy forced a smile, brittle as dry twigs. "Tougher than me, that's for damn sure. She's all I've got." Jack kept scrubbing, but his mind churned. Money trouble could push a good woman to dark places. By midnight, his hands were pruned like raisins. His back ached like he'd wrestled a steer barehanded, and his boots squelched with dishwater that smelled faintly of onion rings. He was mopping the floor, dragging the task out to eavesdrop, when he caught Tammy whispering to Luis behind the counter, their heads bent close. "Special deliveries tomorrow night," she hissed, her voice low and urgent. "Keep it quiet, Luis, or we're both done for. Ellie's done for." Luis nodded, wiping sweat off his brow with a shaky hand, his spurs cap tilted askew. "This better be worth it, Tam. I ain't sleeping right no more." Jack's ears perked like a hound on a scent. "Special delivery?" He accidentally knocked over a broom, letting it clatter loud enough to cover his lingering, but they clammed up fast, shooting him wary glances over their shoulders. Whatever it wasn't on the damn menu, and it wasn't legal. Jack barely slept that night, the words "special delivery" looping in his head like a broken record. He'd crashed at a Fleabag motel off Interstate 27, a dive with peeling wallpaper and a mattress that smelled like regret and cigarette burns. He hit the diner early the next day, wired on bitter gas station coffee and a hunch that wouldn't quit gnawing at him. He'd spent the morning hunched over his burner phone, Googling diner scams, cash skimming, fake vendors, payroll padding, but nothing clicked yet. He kept the Hank Jones act locked tight, slow limp dragging his left leg, gruff, "Yes, sir," to every order, and a knack for spilling ketchup on his apron that earned a dry laugh from Luis during a lull. "You're no Gordon Ramsay, Hank," the kid said, tossing him a fry from a batch he'd just pulled from the fryer, golden and crisp. Jack caught it midair, grinning. "Damn straight, son. My talents run more to breaking than baking." Luis chuckled, shaking his head, but Jack's mind was a steel trap, locking onto every whisper, every sidelong glance. Mid-shift, he caught a break. Tammy was on the phone near the register, her voice hushed but frayed at the edges. "I told you. I'm in. I don't have a choice. Ellie's next round's covered, right? You promised." She hung up, her face pale as a ghost, her fingers drumming nervously on the counter. Jack sidled up during a slow moment, leaning on his mop like it was a crutch, keeping his tone casual. "Ellie holding up okay today, ma'am?" Tammy flinched like he'd poked a bruise, then softened, her shoulders slumping. "She's fighting Hank. Docs say her counts are low. Needs more chemo, maybe a new drug. Insurance quit on me months ago, and I'm drowning in bills. Thousands piling up like a damn mountain." Jack nodded, his throat tight with guilt. He'd been so busy chasing profits he'd missed this kind of pain in his own people. "Sounds like hell. You're a tough one, keeping it together for her." Tammy forced a smile, brittle and thin. Ain't got a choice. She's my world. Closing time rolled around, and Jack volunteered for trash duty, dragging the heavy black bags to the alley with exaggerated slowness, his limp selling the act. At 1 a.m., a beat-up van rolled into the lot. No license plates, headlights dimmed to a faint glow. Two guys in hoodies hopped out, their movements quick and practiced, unloading crates, unmarked, heavy, rattling like they were packed tight with something that wasn't meant to be seen. Tammy slipped them a fat envelope stuffed with cash, her hands trembling so bad she nearly dropped it. Jack ducked behind a dumpster, the stench of rotting grease and stale beer hitting him like a fist, his heart racing like a jackrabbit caught in a snare. He peeked out, watching Louise haul the crates inside, the kid muttering under his breath, "This ain't right, Tam. We're gonna get caught one of these nights." And then what? Tammy hissed back, her voice sharp and desperate. "Shut it, Louise. Ellie's alive because of this. Don't you dare judge me." Jack waited until the van peeled out, tires spitting gravel into the night, before creeping to the back door on silent feet. The crates were stacked in the walk-in freezer, ice fog swirling around them like a shroud. He pried one open with a butter knife he'd swiped from the dish pit. Inside was a pile of slimy, gray fish, reeking like a Louisiana bayou at low tide, the kind of stench that clung to your skin and didn't let go. This wasn't the Gulf shrimp they bragged about on the chalkboard menu, caught fresh daily off the coast. It was counterfeit seafood, cheap imports mislabeled as premium catch, sold to cut corners and pad someone's pockets. Was this why the food tasted like ass now? Why the regulars had bailed, leaving the diner a hollow shell of its former self? He fumbled his burner phone from his pocket, hands slick with sweat, and snapped a picture for proof, the flash flaring like a spotlight in the dim freezer. Footsteps thudded, fast, heavy, closing in. Luis burst through the door, his eyes wide under his Spurs cap, his voice a panicked hiss. "Hank, what the hell you doing back here? You lost or something?" Jack stammered, grasping for a lie. Checking stock. Freezer looked low, thought I'd help out." Luis grabbed his arm, his grip tight, his voice dropping low. "You don't want to be here, man. Get out now, before they see you." Too late. Tammy loomed in the doorway, her face pale as death, her eyes darting like a cornered animal's. "Who are you, really?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Ain't no dishwasher this damn nosy." Before Jack could spin a story, a third figure stepped into the light, a man with a jagged scar slicing across his left cheek, his eyes cold as a rattlesnake's, his frame broad and menacing under a black hoodie. "Problem here, Tammy," he growled, cracking his knuckles with a sound like snapping twigs. Jack's stomach dropped like a stone into a well. He knew that voice, that scar, Tommy Scar Vargas, a cook he'd fired 10 years back from the Lubbock diner for skimming cash from the register. Jack had caught him red-handed, stuffing 20s into his apron during a late shift, and gave him the boot without a second thought. "Get out, Tommy, and don't come back." Scar had glared at him then, spitting on the floor as he left, muttering, "You'll regret this, Reynolds." Now he was back, and the look in his eyes said this wasn't just business. It was personal. Jack didn't sleep that night, Scar's glare burning holes in his memory as he tossed on the motel's lumpy mattress. Tammy wasn't the mastermind. She was scared, trapped, her little girl's life dangling on a thread held by Scar and his crew. Scar wasn't some random thug. He was a ghost from Jack's past, a grudge with legs and a knife. This wasn't just a scam. It was revenge, and Jack had walked right into the crosshairs. Day 3, he showed up at the diner early, leaning hard into the Hank Jones act to keep his cover from cracking. "Sorry about last night, ma'am," he drawled, tipping his hat low over his eyes. "Got turned around. Won't happen again." Tammy squinted at him, her face tense as a coiled spring, but she waved him off with a curt, "Just do your damn job, Hank." He stuck close all day, keeping his ears wide open, his hands busy with the endless pile of dishes. Mid-shift, he caught Luis and Tammy arguing in the break room, their voices low but sharp through the cracked door. "They've got me over a barrel, Luis," Tammy hissed, her tone fraying at the edges. "Ellie's bills, thousands piling up, more every damn week. Scar threatened to cut me off, said he'd pull the plug on her meds if I didn't play ball." Luis kicked a metal chair so hard it skidded across the linoleum, his voice rising in a mix of fear and fury. "This fish is poison, Tam. People get sick. It's on us. I ain't going down for this. Not for Scar. Not for nobody." Tammy grabbed his arm, her nails digging in. "You think I want this? I'm doing it for her. My baby's all I've got left." Jack's got twisted into knots. His diner, his dad's blood, sweat, and tears, was a front for Scar's vengeance, and Tammy was the pawn caught in the middle. That night, Jack hid in the stockroom, crouched behind sacks of flour that smelled faintly of mold, the air thick with dust and tension. At 1 a.m., the van rolled in again, Scar barking orders like a drill sergeant to his 2 hoodie-clad lackeys. More crates stacked up in the alley, more envelopes of cash swapped hands. Thick wads of bills passed with quick, practiced nods. Jack pulled his burner phone, his hands slick with sweat, and recorded it all. Shaky footage of Scar unloading fish, Tammy handing over money, the alley light flickering overhead. He caught Scar's voice on the mic, low and venomous. "Reynolds screwed me once, left me with nothing. Now he pays slow and hard." Jack's blood ran cold. Scar wasn't just here to make a buck. He was here to burn Jack's world to the ground. Then Scar's shadow shifted, catching Jack's reflection in the polished steel of a fridge door across the room. "Get him!" Scar roared, the stockroom door crashing open with a splintering crack. Jack bolted, his fake limp forgotten, slipping on a puddle of grease as he crashed through the kitchen like a bull through a gate. Pans clattered to the floor, a fryer tipped over, hot oil hissing and popping like a nest of angry rattlers. Scar lunged, his meaty fist swinging, but Jack grabbed a cast-iron skillet off the stove, still warm from the last batch of hash browns, and swung it hard, clang, smashing it into Scar's shoulder. Scar roared, stumbling back, clutching his arm with a string of curses that'd make a sailor blush. Jack sprinted for the back door, his apron flapping, the wig slipping off his head and landing in a puddle of spilled grease. He made it 3 steps into the alley before Scar recovered, faster than Jack expected, and grabbed Tammy by the arm as she tried to run after him. Scar yanked her back, pressing a switchblade to her throat, his scarred face twisted in a snarl. "Drop the phone, asshole, or she's done," he bellowed, the blade glinting under the alley light. Tammy's eyes went wide, her breath hitching, a choked sob escaping her lips. Jack froze, his heart pounding so hard he thought it had bust through his ribs, the burner phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline. Okay, easy," Jack shouted, holding up the phone, his voice rough but steady. "Let her go, Scar. You want me, not her." Scar's lip curled, his grip tightening on Tammy. "Phone first, Reynolds. I know it's you under that shitty wig. Toss it now." Jack nodded, faking surrender, and tossed the phone toward Scar's feet, but as Scar loosened his hold to reach for it, Jack charged, swinging the skillet again. This time it cracked against Scar's knee with a sickening thud, sending him sprawling into a stack of crates. Tammy stumbled free, gasping, as Luis burst out the back door. He'd heard the commotion and tackled one of Scar's hoodie guys, pinning him to the gravel with a wild flurry of punches. "Run, Tam!" Luis yelled, his voice cracking. Jack grabbed Tammy's arm, shoving her toward the parking lot as sirens wailed in the distance. Someone inside must have called the cops, maybe Jenny, maybe a late-night regular. Scar scrambled up, limping, knife still in hand, but the red and blue lights flooded the alley before he could lunge again. "Drop it now," a cop bellowed, shotgun raised. Scar spat, tossing the blade, his glare locked on Jack as cuffs snapped around his wrists. Jack slumped in his truck half a mile away, watching the chaos unfold through the windshield, still in his soggy Hank Jones getup, the wig long gone, his apron torn and streaked with grease. Feds swarmed the diner, cuffing Scar and his crew, dragging them out spitting curses into the night. Tammy sat on the curb, sobbing into her hands as she spilled her story to a detective. Scar had been hired by Lone Star Grill, a rival chain, to tank family flavor with counterfeit fish, poisoning the food and a reputation so they could swoop in and buy the wreckage cheap. Scar's personal grudge had just been the cherry on top, a bonus to sweeten the deal. The feds traced it back within hours. Lone Star CEO was hauled off in cuffs by morning, his smug face plastered across every newsstand in Texas. But the note still gnawed at Jack like a splinter he couldn't pull. Who'd tip him off? Why? Back in Chicago, he locked himself in his office, digging through boxes of old files. Yellowed papers from the diner's early days, receipts and invoices stacked in dusty piles. He found it buried in a folder of vendor contracts. A faded invoice from Big Ed's Barbecue, dated 2003, scribbled with a jagged note in black ink. Tell Jack, don't let it die. The handwriting matched the mystery note, every sharp loop and slant identical. Eddie Big Ed Callahan, his dad's old cook, a giant of a man at 6'4" with hands like hams and a voice that boomed over the grill like thunder. Eddie had created the Smoky Stack back in '89, a towering burger with smoked brisket and jalapeno mayo that put family flavor on the map, turning a roadside shack into a name folks drove miles to taste. Jack had fired him 20 years ago, a brash 32-year-old too proud to back down from a fight. It had happened in the Lubbock diner's kitchen. Jack pushing to modernize, ditching Eddie's recipes for trendy garbage like quinoa salads and kale smoothies, chasing city dollars instead of Texas soul. Eddie had called him a sellout, a city boy forgetting his roots. Jack had called him a relic, stuck in the past like a fossil in tar. The fight ended with Jack screaming, "You're done, Ed. Pack your knives and get the hell out." Eddie had walked away, tossing his apron on the counter, leaving Jack with the guilt he'd buried under years of boardroom bullshit and bourbon. Jack tracked Eddie to a shack outside Lubbock, a hole-in-the-wall barbecue joint off a dirt road, smoke curling from a rusted chimney into the twilight sky. The big man was older now, grizzled and gray, flipping ribs over a hickory fire, the air thick with the scent of spice and memory. Jack yanked off his trucker hat, strode in, boots crunching gravel. "You sent the note," he said, voice rough. Eddie didn't flinch, his eyes locked on the grill, tongs steady in his massive hands. "Took you long enough, hot shot," he rumbled, flipping a rack of ribs with a flick of his wrist. "Why?" Jack asked, his voice cracking, raw with years of regret and exhaustion. Eddie tossed the tongs down onto a rickety table, turned slow, towering over Jack like an oak over a sapling. "Wasn't about you, Jack. Not at first. It was Hank, your dad. That diner was his soul, not some corporate cash cow for you to milk dry. I couldn't watch it rot while you sat up in your fancy-ass tower, chasing dollars instead of what matters." Jack swallowed hard, the lump in his throat choking him like a noose. "I screwed up, Ed," he said, the words spilling out like blood from a fresh cut. "Firing you, losing my way, losing Jake, everything. I'm sorry, damn it, I'm sorry." Before Eddie could answer, a voice cut through the smoky air. "Dad?" Jack spun, his knees nearly buckling. Jake Jr. stepped out from the shack's back door, an apron tied around his lean frame, his tattooed arms glistening with sweat, a tray of brisket in his hands. His dark eyes, Hank's eyes, widened, then narrowed. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jack stammered. "Jake? You're here?" Eddie smirked, folding his arms. "Been here 6 months. Kid showed up looking for work, said he was done with Austin, done with running. I taught him the stack, your old man's recipe, not that crap you tried to sell. Figured he'd keep it alive." Jack's world tilted. "You sent the note," he said to Eddie, then turned to Jake. "And you knew?" Jake set the tray down, his jaw tight. "Eddie told me the diner was tanking. Said you'd never listen unless someone kicked you in the ass. I didn't know he wrote it till a week ago." Eddie grunted, a low rumble. "Meant it for Hank's legacy, Jack. Didn't expect it'd bring you both back." Silence hung heavy, the crackle of the fire filling the space between them, 2 stubborn Texans and a kid caught in the middle. Jack stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I lost you once, Jake. I ain't losing you again. Come back. The diner's yours too." Jake hesitated, then nodded, slow and deliberate. "Only if Eddie's in. We need him." Eddie smirked wider, clapping Jack's shoulder. "Only if you stop spilling ketchup, boss. You're a damn disaster." 6 weeks later, Family Flavor reopened in Lubbock, bigger and louder than ever. Jack ditched the suit, wore an apron stained with grease, and grilled alongside Eddie and Jake Jr. The Smoky Stack sizzling back on the menu with Jake's Chipotle twist, a nod to the future. Tammy got a raise. Her Ellie's medical bills paid off. Jack's first order as himself, scribbled on a napkin and handed to HR with a gruff, "Make it happen." The Fed shut down Lone Star Grill. Their CEO's mugshot splashed across every paper from Dallas to El Paso. Justice served hot and fresh. Word spread like wildfire. Free pecan pie for every customer. First come, first served. The parking lot overflowed. Pickups lined up bumper to bumper. Kids chasing fireflies under the neon glow. Johnny Cash blaring Ring of Fire from the jukebox like a victory anthem over the din of laughter and clinking glasses. Jack flipped a burger, grease popping on the grill, sweat beading on his brow as he watched the crowd. Old-timers swapped stories about Hank Reynolds' early days, how he'd trade burgers for gas when times were lean. Truckers toasted with sweet tea, their rigs gleaming in the lot. Tammy laughed for the first time in months, serving pie with Jenny at her side while Ellie, bald but beaming, sat at the counter coloring a picture of a horse. Luis manned the fryer, grinning. He'd tackled Scar's goon like a linebacker, earning a round of applause from the crew when the cops hauled the bastard off. Jack had lost his way in that Chicago high-rise, forgetting the sweat and grit that built this place. The late nights his dad spent perfecting the Smoky Stack. The mornings Jack and Jake mopped floors together before school, dreaming of their own mark. The note wasn't just a warning. It was a lifeline thrown by Eddie, echoing Hank's voice from beyond the grave, pulling Jack and Jake back to the red dirt of Texas where they belonged. "Family ain't just blood," Eddie said, clapping Jack's shoulder with a meaty hand, ribs smoking behind him on the pit. "It's this mess and all." Jake nodded, flipping a patty beside him, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Damn right." Jack swallowed the lump in his throat, his voice rough but warm. To Hank and to us. For the first time in 20 years, he felt whole. He was home. Lesson learned from the story. The story of Jack Reynolds in What's Hiding in the Grease? The secret that nearly fried a Texas dynasty teaches us a powerful lesson. Sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone and get your hands dirty to truly understand what matters most. Jack started as a disconnected CEO, sitting in his fancy Chicago office, blind to the struggles of his diner and his own family. It wasn't until he ditched the suit, put on an apron, and scrubbed dishes as Hank Jones that he saw the truth about his business, his people, and himself. The lesson here is about humility and connection. Life's not about staying on top. It's about digging into the mess, listening to the folks on the ground, and fighting for what's worth saving. Whether it's a family legacy, a struggling mom like Tammy, or a bond with a son like Jay Jr., it's a reminder that real strength comes from facing the grease and grit head-on, not hiding behind a desk. Meaningful message conveyed. This story delivers a heartfelt message. Family and community are the soul of any success, and they're worth more than any profit margin. Jack thought he was saving a business, but what he really saved was his relationship with Jake Jr., his bond with Eddie, and the spirit of the diner that held them all together. It's about rediscovering roots, those dusty Texas roads, the sizzle of a grill, the laughter of a packed parking lot. The message hits hard in a world obsessed with climbing ladders and chasing bucks. The real treasure isn't at the top. It's in the people you lift up along the way. Tammy's fight for Ellie, Luis's gutsy stand, Eddie's quiet loyalty. They show that every small act of courage keeps the heart of a community beating. It's a call to value what's real over what's shiny, to hold tight to the ones who matter, because that's what endures when the storms roll in. Personal perspective from the story. From my take, this story's a gut punch about redemption and second chances, stuff that gets me every time. Jack's not some perfect hero. He's a guy who screwed up, lost his way, and let pride push his son and his dad's dream out the door. But what I love is how he doesn't just wallow. He rolls up his sleeves, steps in a fire, and makes it right. That skillet-swinging showdown with Scar? Pure Texas badassery, but it's the quiet moments, like facing Eddie or seeing Jake Jr. again, that hit me hardest. It's personal because I think we've all got a diner in our lives, something we've let slip, someone we've pushed away. Jack's journey says it's never too late to turn back, to fight for what you've lost. And that twist with Jake Jr.? Man, it's hope wrapped in a barbecue apron. Proof that even when you think you're alone, someone's still rooting for you to pull through. Hey, if you love Jack's wild ride in What's Hiding the Grease, the secret that nearly fried a Texas dynasty, the grease, the grit, the heart-pounding twists, then you've got to stick around for more. Hit that subscribe button on Story Precious right now and ring the bell so you don't miss a single drop of our latest videos. We're cooking up fresh stories every week. Tales of underdogs, heroes, and second chances that'll keep you hooked from the first bite to the last crumb. Join our crew, drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep the fire going together, because at Story Precious, every story's a treasure worth savoring. Subscribe today.